A few years ago, I was scrolling through social media, procrastinating obviously, and I landed on one of those 100 years of fashion videos. You know the type. Fast cuts, upbeat music, a model spinning into new outfits decade by decade. I must have watched 10 of them back to back. Japan, Argentina, Ethiopia, Russia, I was hooked. What struck me wasn't just how gorgeous the traditional clothing was, the embroidery, the textures, the symbolism stitched into every fold. It was how suddenly things started looking the same. Somewhere between the 1920s and the 1950s, something changed. Local dress began to fade. Kimono turned into cardigans, saris gave way to pencil skirts, and by the time we hit the 1980s, half the world was in jeans and t-shirts. It didn't fully hit me until I rewatched one of those videos years later. I sat there wondering, when exactly did the whole planet agree that denim and sneakers were the default? When did global fashion go from deeply cultural to kind of copy-paste? And more importantly, what did we lose along the way? So today, we're talking about fashion, but not runway looks or what's hot for spring. We're going deeper into culture, into colonization, into aspiration, into identity. Because clothing is never just fabric, it's language. And over the last century, that language went from regional dialects to global slang. As always, context is everything. And fashion tells the story of who we thought we were and who the world told us to be. Let's rewind. Before everything started blending together, fashion used to be hyper-local. For most of human history, what you wore wasn't just about style, it was a walking biography. It told your story before you even opened your mouth. Clothes said, this is my tribe, this is my region, this is my social status, this is who I answer to, what I believe, and whether or not I'm married. No need for introductions. A Maasai warrior in Kenya could be recognized from miles away by his red shuka and beaded adornments, and women in India wrapped in a silk sari, each pattern specific to her region, her class, even her occasion. A Korean elder wore a white hanbok, and a Scotsman in his family tartan. A noblewoman in Versailles weighed down in layers of lace and silk, the height of 18th century flexing. These weren't just outfits, they were identity, broadcast in linen and dye. And for centuries, that system stayed remarkably stable. Styles evolved, sure, but the idea that your clothing was tied to your culture, that was the norm. What you wore rooted you, gave you place, community, context. And it wasn't just culture. For much of history, fashion was weaponized by power structures. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, sumptuary laws dictated exactly what you could and couldn't wear based on your rank. Silk, only for the nobility. Deep violet, reserved for royalty. In Elizabethan England, a shoemaker couldn't wear velvet without risking arrest. These weren't just social customs, they were codified, enforced regulations. Clothing was a visible caste system tailored by law. Across the globe, similar dress codes enforced hierarchy. In China's Ming Dynasty, strict color codes dictated who could wear yellow. Only the emperor, thank you very much. In the Ottoman Empire, the shape and wrapping style of your turban could determine your rank and profession. Even the type of shoe you wore in Venice could mark your place on the social ladder. Fashion wasn't freedom, it was surveillance, control, a thread that tied you to your place in society and punished you for stepping out of line. Then, everything sped up. Take Japan, for example. During the Meiji era in the late 19th century, the government embarked on an aggressive campaign of westernization to position itself as a global power. That meant adopting not just Western technologies and institutions, but also Western clothes. Government officials were required to wear suits and bowler hats instead of kimono. School uniforms were modeled after European military styles. Even the emperor himself traded his traditional robes for a Prussian-style military uniform. It was a fashion rebrand at the national level, an effort to look modern in the eyes of Europe. And in the process, centuries of traditional Japanese dress were reframed as old-fashioned, rural, or even embarrassing. This wasn't unique to Japan. All over the world, nations trying to gain political legitimacy or economic influence found themselves pressured by colonizers, by trade partners, by internal elites to dress the part. And the quote-unquote part was increasingly Western. As the 20th century dawned, the world was on the verge of collapse and reinvention. Trains, ships, and early flight connected cities like never before. Newspapers and photographs started capturing and spreading images of other people's lives, and under the surface, massive forces were beginning to pull the threads of traditional dress loose. And then, like a match to fabric, war. War changes everything. Borders, economies, families. But fashion? Fashion may be one of the most underrated casualties of global conflict. When World War I broke out, it didn't just take lives. It took fabric, labor, and time. Material rationing meant hemlines rose and silhouettes simplified. Suddenly, the ornate detailing that once marked class and heritage was out. Efficiency was in. Everything got sharper, straighter, smaller. Corsets loosened or disappeared entirely. Women working in factories and on farms couldn't be cinched into lace and boning. They needed movement, function, fabric that wouldn't catch in machinery or get ruined in the mud. And it wasn't just about clothes, it was about identity. When World War II rolled around, the transformation accelerated. Millions of women entered the workforce, taking over jobs traditionally held by men, and they dressed for the job. Pants, button-downs, boiler suits, coveralls. The wartime woman didn't just borrow her husband's wardrobe, she claimed it. In Britain and the US, the government even issued style guides encouraging people to make do and mend. You couldn't buy something new every season, so you learned to alter, to reuse, to stitch one more season out of a worn skirt. Clothes became practical, purposeful, and in many cases androgynous. Even civilians started looking like soldiers. Structured jackets, khaki tones, minimal decoration. It wasn't a trend, it was survival. And once the war was over, the question lingered in the air like smoke. Do we go back? Some did. Dior famously launched its quote-unquote new look in 1947. A hyper-feminine silhouette with nipped waists and voluminous skirts, a direct rebellion against wartime austerity. But not everyone was ready, or willing, to return to tight waists and fragile fabrics. Some women had tasted comfort, utility, power. And all the while, Western clothing, streamlined, minimal, modern, was beginning to spread. Because while soldiers were fighting, industries were watching, and what they saw was a global population newly trained in uniformity. The war was over, but the uniforms never really came off. In the aftermath of World War II, much of Europe and Asia was in ruins. Cities reduced to rubble, economies shattered. But the United States, the U.S. came out booming, industrialized, modernized, and ready to sell a dream. And one of its most powerful exports, image. Enter Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, Audrey Hepburn, Marlon Brando. These weren't just actors, they were archetypes. And they weren't just watched, they were worshipped. For the first time in history, people on opposite sides of the globe could see the exact same faces, the exact same outfits, the exact same attitudes, all flickering to life on theater screens, magazine covers, and soon, televisions. And what were those faces wearing? Sunglasses, white tees, cinched waists, leather jackets, blue jeans. These clothes weren't just stylish, they were saturated in something electric. Freedom. American fashion, especially in the 1950s, became shorthand for rebellion, youth, sex appeal, and possibility. You weren't just buying pants, you were buying a piece of cool. A teenager in West Berlin, a high schooler in Buenos Aires, a college student in Tokyo. They all wanted the same pair of Levi's, that slicked hair, that effortless swagger. Because for the first time ever, fashion wasn't about where you were from, it was about what you wanted to be. And this shift wasn't accidental. Western brands knew exactly what they were doing. Marketing agencies played up the individualism, the glamour, the anyone can have this life appeal. American values were being sewn into the seams of every mass-produced garment. And as American culture spread, traditional clothing began to recede, not just in practice, but in perception. What once symbolized pride, identity, and heritage was now labeled old-fashioned. Wearing a hanbok, a sari, or a bobo became something you did for weddings or religious festivals, not for school or work or walking down the street. Because why wear something ancient when you could wear something modern? By the time the 1970s and 1980s hit, the fashion floodgates had opened, and the current was global. Manufacturing began shifting to countries with cheaper labor. Suddenly, clothing wasn't something made by local artisans or tailored by hand, it was produced by machines, in bulk, overseas, at record speed. This changed everything. Once clothing could be made faster and cheaper, it could also be distributed farther. Shirts that once took weeks to sew and months to ship out could now be mass-produced and sold in department stores across 5 continents within the same season. Fashion wasn't seasonal anymore, it was continuous, endless, and it was everywhere. At the same time, pop culture wasn't just influencing fashion, it was fashion. Think about it. Madonna's lace gloves, Michael Jackson's red leather jacket, Prince's purple everything. These artists weren't just chart-topping musicians, they were walking trend machines. Their albums launched not just tours, but entire aesthetics. Teenagers across the world copied every detail, the clothes, the hair, the attitude. And now it wasn't just movie stars, anyone with a global platform could shape how the world dressed. Western media flooded the global market. Magazines, music videos, MTV, these weren't just entertainment, they were visual catalogs. And the message was clear: if you want to be modern, if you want to be seen, if you want to matter, dress like this. T-shirts, denim, sneakers, logos, fashion became more streamlined, more universal, more flat. And the farther this spread, the more traditional dress was pushed into the margins. Not banned, not forgotten, but boxed up. Reserved for special occasions, for ceremony, not daily life. Which raises a question. When did our everyday selves become separate from our cultural selves? Because by the 1990s, it wasn't just about what was convenient. It was about what felt normal. And normal, increasingly, meant Western. So here's the part where it gets deeply, unmistakably human. For all the political systems and production chains we talked about, there's one ancient, primal reason fashion spreads the way it does. We copy what we admire. Always have, always will. It's in our DNA. Centuries ago, British nobles tried desperately to out-French the French. The powdered wigs, the velvet breeches, the impossible heels. That wasn't organic style. That was a colonial fashion crush. Versailles was the standard, and everyone else was playing dress-up just to keep up. Fashion for most of history has been a form of social aspiration. You didn't just wear what looked good, you wore what made you look higher, richer, more powerful, more connected, more desirable. And that logic never disappeared, it just swapped palaces for pop culture. Today, instead of looking to kings or queens, we look to influencers, athletes, actors, the people who seem to have something we want: money, attention, followers, freedom. And our instinct is the same. If I can look like them, maybe I'll be seen like them. That's how a specific pair of sneakers becomes a global phenomenon. That's why a bag with a certain logo can cost more than a used car. We're not always paying for the materials, we're buying the story, the status, the association. And then there's colonization, because this wasn't always about admiration. Sometimes fashion was forced. Colonizers didn't just take land, they imposed dress codes. In many places, traditional garments were outlawed or discouraged. People were made to wear suits, corsets, or uniforms as a way of civilizing them. It was fashion as dominance, as assimilation, as erasure. But here's where it gets complicated. Not everyone who wore the colonizers' clothes was forced at gunpoint. Some chose it. Because sometimes adopting those foreign styles meant gaining access to education, employment, mobility. In systems built to reward conformity, looking the part was kind of a passport. And for many, it wasn't surrender, it was survival. That layered relationship with clothing, between power and protection, oppression and opportunity, didn't end with colonization. It echoes today in how people navigate identity. All over the world, that same thread is being picked up again, but this time it's intentional. Now wearing traditional garments or blending them with modern styles isn't just a nod to heritage, it's a declaration, a reclamation. Take the rise of indigenous designers like Karina Emmerich, who blends Coast Salish motifs with sustainable fashion to challenge both colonial erasure and modern waste. Or Bethany Yellowtail, who centers native voices and stories through wearable art that reclaims what was once oppressed. In New Zealand, Maori communities are proudly donning korowai cloaks and tamoko designs in both ceremonial and professional spaces. In the US and UK, Afrocentric styles, head wraps, Ankara prints, dreadlocks are no longer hidden or apologized for, but celebrated as daily wear. South Asian youth are relearning how to tie saris or wear kurta with pride, not just on Diwali, but to class or to work. These aren't just fashion statements, they're declarations. Even today, you'll find people straddling that line, wearing one face to get through the door and another one at home. Style as code switching, fashion as camouflage. And now with social media pumping out new aesthetics by the hour, we're not just copying up, we're copying sideways, across cultures, across subcultures, across borders. Your Pinterest board might include Korean streetwear, Mexican embroidery, and 1990s grunge all in one place. And that's not inherently bad. Cross-pollination is part of how fashion evolves. But it does raise a question. When does admiration turn into appropriation? When does inspiration become erasure? Here we are, in the age of the algorithm. We have more freedom now than ever before. No sumptuary laws, no colonial dress codes, no rigid expectations about corsets or tunics or top hats. You can technically wear whatever you want. And yet, most people don't. In fact, despite infinite choice, we've created a world where individuality is both idolized and policed. Let's unpack that a little. The internet was supposed to democratize everything, and in a lot of ways it did. You don't have to live in Paris or Milan to be a fashion influencer, and you don't need a Vogue spread to go viral. A teenager in rural Idaho can post a fit check and start a global microtrend. That's wild. That's powerful. But it's also overwhelming, because now you're not just dressing for your friends or your town or your job, you're dressing for an invisible audience. The scrolling masses, the grid, the feed. And that pressure, it shapes everything. TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, they don't just reflect your taste, they curate it, they shape it, they train it, subtly, relentlessly. You like one video with cottagecore vibes? Suddenly your whole feed is linen dresses and herbal tea. You linger on an edgy punk outfit for 3 seconds too long? Hello, chains and fishnets. And because the algorithm rewards consistency, you're nudged to commit, to pick an aesthetic, build a personal brand, and never deviate too far. We live in a time when we're encouraged to express ourselves as long as we stay within the right mood board. Even fashion trends that scream individuality, like alt-style, Y2K, or maximalism, come with unspoken rulebooks. You can be different, sure, but only in ways the internet has pre-approved. And if you do break the mold, you'll get noticed, but not always in a good way. We've all seen it happen. Someone wears something truly unique, something meaningful or traditional or totally off trend, and the comments come rolling in. Cringe. Try hard. What are they wearing? It's ironic. We've traded assigned uniforms for self-made cages. Now the dress code is invisible, but no less real. And here's the kicker. For most of human history, you didn't get to choose what to wear. Your clothing was assigned. Your station in life was embroidered into your sleeves, sometimes quite literally. In medieval Europe, laws dictated who could wear silk, fur, or certain colors. In some cultures, only royalty could wear specific patterns. In others, your dress was defined by your trade, your clan, your religion. Now we have freedom, but with that comes pressure. Not just to pick the right aesthetic, but to keep up with trends that shift weekly. We went from rigid tradition to chaos, from identity to anxiety. Let's talk about the monster in the modern closet, fast fashion. You've probably heard the term before, but what it really means is a complete rewrite of how clothing is designed, produced, bought, and discarded. And it all started when fashion stopped being seasonal and started being weekly. See, for most of history, clothing followed natural cycles. You had a few core pieces, maybe updated once or twice a year if your finances allowed it. Fashion houses unveiled new collections for spring and fall. People shopped slowly, intentionally. Clothes were investments, sometimes heirlooms. Now, walk into a fast fashion store and you'll find 52 micro-seasons a year. That's one every single week. Companies like Zara, H&M, Shein, they're not just responding to trends, they're creating them in real time. A viral look hits TikTok and within days, it's replicated, mass-produced, and shipped worldwide. It's fashion as content, fashion as clickbait. And the system relies on one key thing, making us feel like we're behind. Because the moment a trend disappears, the countdown begins. If you don't buy it now, it'll be gone. And once you do buy it, you're already on the edge of being outdated. That's how we've ended up with closets full of clothes and nothing to wear. Because fast fashion isn't designed for longevity. It's not made to last. It's made to keep you moving, to keep you buying. The materials are cheap, the labor is cheaper, and the cycle is relentless. This isn't just bad for your wallet, it's catastrophic for the planet. Textile waste is one of the fastest growing waste streams in the world. Clothes are burned, buried, dumped in developing countries by the ton. Entire landscapes are choking under the weight of discarded outfits we wore once or not at all. And the human cost is just as high. Fast fashion runs on exploitive labor, often in unsafe factories with brutal hours and poverty wages. Behind every $7 dress is someone who wasn't paid enough to eat. So why do we keep participating? Because we're tired. Because we're broke. Because we're flooded with choices but paralyzed by the pressure to be stylish, current, and aesthetic. We're playing a game we didn't invent, and the house always wins. But here's the thing, and I'll say it louder for the folks in the back. You don't have to play by their rules. More and more people are opting out, thrifting, upcycling, choosing quality over quantity. Not because it's trendy, but because they're over it. Over the waste, over the noise, over feeling like they're never fashionable enough. And maybe you feel that too. Maybe you're ready for something slower, something with meaning. Something that doesn't just look good in the mirror, but feels good in your bones. Okay, so if fast fashion is the chaotic engine of modern style, then what's high fashion? Let's picture it. The Met Gala, Paris Fashion Week, runways in Milan, models in heels tighter than my will to meal prep, and outfits made of tulle, LED lights, or why not a taxidermied swan? We've all seen them. Those high-concept avant-garde designs that look more like installations than outfits. Haute couture, they call it. Literally, high sewing. But here's the question. Who is this for? Because at some point, fashion split. On one path, we have everyday people buying leggings in bulk and panic scrolling through Shein. And on the other, we have designers turning the runway into abstract expressionism with a Vogue-approved price tag. It didn't used to be quite so divided. In decades past, what happened in haute couture often trickled down. The silhouettes, the fabrics, the colored palettes, they'd slowly filter into department stores, catalogs, wardrobes. What you saw on the runway might influence your Easter dress next spring. But now, the gap feels cosmic. Because runway fashion isn't about wearability anymore. It's about concept. It's not telling you what to wear. It's telling you how the designer feels. It's a mood board in motion, an art exhibit stitched together. And look, I love that. I think fashion is art. But I also think we need to name it what it's become. Less about inspiring the public and more about impressing a very elite, very niche crowd. And while that's all happening, most people are stuck between burnout and boredom, because what they can afford to buy feels meaningless, repetitive, disconnected from culture, story, and identity. So here's what's wild. We have these two extremes: fast fashion, which devalues clothing by making it disposable, and high fashion, which devalues it by making it untouchable. Where's the middle? Where's the space for clothing that's beautiful, ethical, accessible, and culturally rooted? That's what so many people are searching for right now. Not just a look, but a link. A way to connect to their identity, their heritage, their creativity without choosing between sweatshops and shock value. And it's in that search between TikTok try-ons and red carpet theatrics that something new is starting to grow. So here we are, 100 years after the world started dressing the same. People are remembering who they are on purpose. Because you can only wear someone else's story for so long before it starts to itch. You can only scroll through identical outfits on identical bodies for so long before your soul starts whispering, "What about me?" And that whisper, it's getting louder. All over the world, people, especially young people, are digging back through the closets of their culture, dusting off old photos, asking questions, reclaiming what was almost lost. They're learning to tie saris, braid their hair the way their grandmother did, to wear moccasins not as a costume but as a birthright, to mix modern with ancestral, not out of nostalgia but out of power. This is happening in Black communities, Indigenous communities, immigrant families, diasporas of every kind. After generations of being told that tradition was backwards, that modern meant Western, that assimilation was the only ticket to success, they're saying no, not anymore. And that reclamation, it's radical. Not just because it looks different, but because it says, my story matters. Because it dares to be visible. In a world that rewards conformity, choosing to wear something meaningful is an act of resistance. Now, this doesn't just mean we throw out all our jeans and start sewing homespun linen tunics by candlelight, unless you want to. And honestly, send pics, please. But it does mean asking questions. Where do my clothes come from? What do they say about me? What stories are they telling, whether I meant them to or not? It means being intentional, not just aesthetic. Because fashion is never just about what's in or out. It's about what we choose to carry on our skin, our armor, our billboard, our art. And when you start to see it like that, context isn't just helpful, it's sacred. Thank you so much for spending time with me today on Context is Everything. If you found yourself nodding along, or maybe questioning the contents of your closet, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me online as Queen of the Britons, that's QNOTBRITTONS, on YouTube and TikTok, or Fiona the Witch on Twitch. I stream a bit of everything there, and I'm always open to bringing some podcast topics into the mix if y'all are curious. If this episode resonated with you, share it, leave a review. Tell your fashion-forward friend or your grandma. I bet she's got stories. All sources, bonus links, and visuals are in the episode notes if you want to nerd out with me further, which if you've made it this far, I think you do. Next time, we'll be diving into what happens when generations start remembering who they were on purpose. From food to language to family names, we'll explore the reclamation of roots and the rise of heritage as identity. Until then, wear what feels true, stand tall in your story, and never stop asking why. Because sometimes context doesn't just change what we wear, it changes what we honor.